My name is Claire Bennett, and I was 27 years old when my own parents stood in my apartment, pointed toward the front door, and told me it wasn't my home anymore. The funny thing? They genuinely believed they had the authority to throw me out. What they didn't know was that my signature was still attached to every document that made that apartment legally exist. They thought they'd won. I let them believe that. For almost 3 months. If you've ever been treated like the responsible child who was expected to sacrifice everything while someone else got rewarded, you are going to understand exactly how this story feels. And if stories about justice finally catching up with people are your thing, make sure you're subscribed. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come from shouting louder. Sometimes it comes from reading the paperwork nobody else bothered to read. Growing up, there were 4 people in my family: my dad, my mom, my younger sister Emma, and me. But if you'd asked my parents, they probably would have described it differently. There was Emma, and then there was the person who made Emma's life easier: me. It's strange how favoritism works. People imagine it looks dramatic, cruel, obvious. It usually doesn't. It hides inside tiny moments. Emma would forget to do her chores. I'd end up doing them because she's had a stressful week. Emma would spend her allowance in 2 days. I'd lend her money because you're so responsible. Emma would crash the family car. I'd drive everyone to work because you don't mind helping. Every little sacrifice became another brick in the wall separating us. By the time I was 16, I already understood something I couldn't put into words. Love in our house wasn't unconditional, it was transactional. The easier I made everyone else's life, the more acceptable I became. Not loved, useful. There's a difference. I remember lying awake one night after Dad had praised Emma for getting a C on a math test while asking me why I hadn't gotten 100% on mine. I stared at the ceiling. The fan made a quiet clicking noise every few seconds. Click, click, click. I kept wondering, what would happen if I just stopped trying? The answer arrived faster than I expected. Nobody noticed. So I started making plans. Not revenge, escape. I worked after school, weekends, summer breaks, coffee shops, retail stores, tutoring younger students, anything that paid. While Emma spent money on concerts, clothes, vacations with friends, and expensive makeup. I opened another savings account. Every paycheck felt like another inch farther away from that house. When I graduated college with almost no debt thanks to scholarships and relentless work, my parents barely celebrated. Emma had just started dating someone new. Guess which topic dominated dinner? I wasn't surprised anymore. Disappointment only hurts when hope is still alive. Mine had quietly died years earlier. 3 years later, I bought my apartment. Well, bought wasn't exactly the right word. I financed it. A modest 1-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing luxurious. Older building, wood floors that creaked, small balcony overlooking a row of maple trees, a kitchen barely large enough for one person. But it was mine. The first night I slept there, I woke up at 3 in the morning because everything was silent. No yelling, no criticism, no Emma demanding rides, no mom asking why I wasn't helping, no dad reminding me that family comes before yourself. Just silence. Beautiful silence. I actually cried. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears rolling into my pillow. Because for the first time, peace had an address. The apartment wasn't easy to buy. The bank required extra documentation because I was young. The building had recently converted from rentals into individually owned units. The paperwork seemed endless. There were ownership registrations, association agreements, utility contracts, insurance forms, loan documents, municipal filings, identity verification. I remember joking with the attorney handling the closing. I think I've signed my name more today than during my entire college career. He laughed. You'd be surprised how often these papers save people later. At the time, I had no idea how right he was. For almost 4 years, life became wonderfully boring. I worked as a project coordinator for a logistics company. Nothing glamorous. Good salary. Predictable hours. Enough money to slowly renovate my apartment. I painted the walls myself, built furniture while watching online tutorials, killed approximately 6 houseplants before finally learning how often they actually needed water. Every improvement felt personal. Every scratch in the hardwood floor had a story. That apartment wasn't just property, it was proof. Proof that I'd built something without depending on anyone, especially my parents. We still talked. Birthdays, Christmas, occasional Sunday dinners. I kept healthy boundaries. Or at least, I thought they were healthy. Until Emma called. Claire? Her voice sounded sweeter than usual. Too sweet. People don't suddenly become nicer without wanting something. Hey, I was wondering. Here we go. Could I stay with you for a little while? I leaned back in my chair. How long is a little while? Oh, maybe 2 weeks. Never trust anyone who says maybe. It means they already know the answer. They just don't want to tell you. What happened? Silence. Then, Ryan and I broke up. There it was. Emma had moved in with her boyfriend almost a year earlier. Apparently, that arrangement had exploded. I'm sorry, I said honestly. Breakups hurt. Even Emma deserved sympathy for that. So, can I stay? Every instinct told me no. Every memory, every experience, every scar. But another voice whispered, she's your sister. Maybe she's changed. People deserve second chances. Sometimes the kindest decisions become the most expensive ones. I wish I'd remembered that. 2 weeks, I said. That's all. She practically squealed. Oh my God, thank you. You're seriously the best. I should have noticed. She never thanked me that enthusiastically unless she planned on asking for something bigger later. She arrived with everything. Not 2 suitcases, not 3. An entire moving truck, boxes, furniture, television, kitchen appliances, clothing racks, decorations. I stood frozen in the parking lot. What is all this? She smiled. I figured it'd be easier. Easier for what? You know. No. She laughed nervously. Moving. Emma, this is temporary. Temporary. That word would come back to haunt me. The first week wasn't terrible. She cooked once, cleaned occasionally, watched television, spent hours scrolling through her phone. She cried about Ryan. I listened. I genuinely tried to be supportive. Maybe adulthood had finally humbled her. Maybe we'd eventually become sisters instead of strangers connected by blood. Then week 2 ended. Nothing got packed. Week 3. Still there? Week 4. Her clothes had migrated into my closet. Week 5. Packages started arriving addressed to Emma Bennett, at my apartment. That made my stomach tighten. I picked one up. Why are you changing your mailing address? She barely looked away from her phone. Oh, it was easier. No. What? It isn't easier. She sighed dramatically. It's just mail. No. It's temporary. So why change your address? She rolled her eyes. You always overthink everything. Maybe. Or maybe I was finally paying attention. Then my parents started visiting. Frequently. Too frequently. Mom began bringing groceries. Dad helped Emma assemble furniture. Furniture. Furniture doesn't belong in temporary situations. One afternoon I came home from work and found Dad drilling shelves into my bedroom wall. My bedroom. I stared. What are you doing? He didn't even stop drilling. Helping Emma organize. I looked toward my room. Half my belongings were stacked in boxes. What? My voice almost disappeared. Is happening? Emma walked out wearing one of my sweaters. Oh, we rearranged. We? Mom smiled. It makes more sense this way. What does? You have the smaller room now. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because the alternative was screaming. I'm sorry. Nobody answered. So let me ask again. I set my keys on the counter, very carefully. What exactly is happening inside my apartment? The room became painfully quiet. Dad finally turned off the drill. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. We think it's only fair if Emma stays here permanently. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. For a second, I honestly wondered if I'd misheard him. Permanently? Mom nodded as though discussing the weather. She needs stability. I looked at Emma. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. And what about me? Dad shrugged. You're independent. Independent. That word. The same word they'd used my entire life whenever they wanted me to sacrifice something. You're independent. You'll understand. You'll figure it out. You don't really need it. I could actually feel my heartbeat in my ears. Slow, heavy, like distant drums. I looked around my own living room. Family photos I'd framed, books I'd bought, furniture I'd assembled, curtains I'd hung. Everything suddenly looked unfamiliar, like someone else had already started rewriting my life without asking permission. Then my mother smiled. Not warmly, not apologetically, confidently. As parents, we've decided this is what's best. I stared at her, then at Dad, then at Emma, and a single thought echoed through my head. Since when did they think they had the authority to decide who owned my home? I was about to find out. And what happened next would make me question everything I thought I knew about my own family. For the next 24 hours, I convinced myself I had misunderstood. People don't simply decide someone else's home belongs to another person. Not in real life. Not outside of bad television dramas. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the apartment felt amplified. Emma laughing softly at a video in the living room, the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the plumbing groaning somewhere inside the walls. My own heartbeat. It felt like my body knew something my mind refused to accept. Morning came with a dull ache behind my eyes. I made coffee in silence, wrapping both hands around the mug, hoping the warmth would settle the knot in my chest. Emma wandered into the kitchen wearing slippers that belonged to me. She opened the refrigerator without saying good morning. You drank the last of the oat milk, I said quietly. Oh. She shrugged. I figured you'd buy more. I stared at her. Not because of the milk, because of how naturally she had said it, as though my apartment had already become a shared responsibility. Or rather, my responsibility. Everything else was hers. I wanted to argue. Instead, I left for work. I spent most of the day accomplishing almost nothing. My spreadsheets blurred together. Emails went unanswered longer than usual. Twice, I caught myself reading the same paragraph without absorbing a single word. Around lunch, my coworker Maya looked across the conference table. You okay? I forced a smile. Just tired. She tilted her head. You don't look tired. What do I look like? Like someone waiting for bad news. That sentence stayed with me, because I wasn't waiting anymore. Bad news had already moved into my guest room. When I got home that evening, there were 3 unfamiliar cars parked outside my building. Music drifted down the hallway before I even unlocked the door. Laughter, voices, the unmistakable smell of pizza. I opened the door. Half a dozen people I'd never met were sitting in my living room. One of them waved. Oh, hey, you must be Claire. I looked at Emma. What is this? She smiled, almost embarrassed. My friends came over. My friends? Yeah. You invited strangers into my apartment? They aren't strangers. They're strangers to me. One of the guests cleared his throat awkwardly. Another suddenly became very interested in his phone. Emma crossed her arms. You're making this weird. No, I said, keeping my voice level. You made this weird. The room became painfully quiet. I walked into the kitchen. Every clean plate I owned sat dirty in the sink. Pizza boxes covered the counter. Someone had left soda spilled across the table. My favorite coffee mug, the one I'd bought during a weekend trip years earlier, sat cracked in two pieces beside the trash. I picked it up carefully. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't rare. It just mattered to me. I looked back toward the living room. Everyone needs to leave. Emma laughed. Seriously? Yes. They just got here. I don't care. One of her friends stood up. We should probably… No. Emma interrupted. Sit down. Then she looked directly at me. This isn't only your place anymore. Silence. Complete silence. I felt something inside me go still. Not anger. Not sadness. Recognition. This wasn't an accident. It hadn't been for weeks. She genuinely believed it. Someone had convinced her she belonged here as much as I did. Maybe more. After everyone finally left, I locked the door. Emma rolled her eyes dramatically. You embarrassed me. I embarrassed you? You acted like I invited criminals. You invited 6 people I don't know into my home. Our home? I looked at her. No. Our. No. She sighed. You've always been selfish. That word landed harder than it should have. Selfish. I'd paid for the apartment, paid every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every repair, every homeowners association fee, every insurance payment. Yet somehow, wanting to live in my own apartment made me selfish. I laughed. Not because anything was funny, because the alternative was crying. 2 days later, my parents invited me over for dinner. Or rather, summoned me. Dad called while I was leaving work. We need to talk. His tone wasn't warm. It wasn't angry either. It carried that familiar certainty. The certainty of someone who assumes the conversation has already been decided. I almost declined. Instead, I went. Some habits take years to unlearn. Dinner was uncomfortable from the moment I sat down. Mom had cooked my favorite meal, which somehow made everything worse. She only did that when she wanted something. Halfway through dessert, Dad folded his hands. We've been thinking. Here it comes. You've always landed on your feet. I stayed quiet. Emma hasn't? Still quiet. She needs a stable environment. I looked at him. So do I. He smiled patiently. As I said, you're stronger. There it was again. Strength, responsibility, independence. Every compliment disguised as another expectation. So, what exactly are you asking? Mom answered. We think you should move. I blinked. I'm sorry? You work downtown. She nodded confidently. You could rent somewhere closer. I own my apartment. Dad leaned back. You'll own another someday. The room suddenly felt much smaller. I'm not moving. Mom exchanged a glance with Dad. We hoped you'd be mature about this. I laughed softly. Mature? Yes. You mean obedient? Neither of them answered. That was answer enough. The pressure didn't stop there. For the next several weeks, the phone calls became constant. Mom called during lunch. Dad called after work. Emma texted almost every day. Just think about it. It would mean so much. Family helps family. Don't make this harder. Every message carried the same implication. If I refused, I was the problem. Never mind the fact that nobody had asked before moving Emma into my life indefinitely. Never mind the fact that nobody had offered to compensate me. Never mind the mortgage, the bills, the years I'd sacrificed to build what I had. Those details apparently mattered less than Emma's comfort. Then things became stranger. Mail started disappearing. Not all of it, just enough to make me suspicious. One utility statement never arrived. A bank notice showed up weeks late. A package containing replacement keys for my mailbox had already been opened. I asked Emma. She shrugged. Maybe I grabbed it by mistake. Maybe, except mistakes don't happen every week. Then one Saturday morning, I noticed something else. My filing cabinet had been moved, only a few inches. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did, because I always kept it aligned with the edge of the bookshelf. Now it wasn't. I unlocked it. The folders inside looked untouched. Mortgage paperwork, insurance, tax records, closing documents. Everything appeared to be there, but something felt off. I couldn't explain why, just a quiet instinct, the kind that whispers instead of shouts. I counted every folder. Everything was present. Still. I bought a small fireproof safe the next day, not because I knew something was wrong, because I was beginning to understand that trust had quietly left the apartment weeks ago. By the middle of the second month, I realized I wasn't living in my own home anymore. I was surviving inside it. Every room carried tension. Every conversation felt like walking across cracked ice. Even making dinner became awkward. Emma complained about what I cooked. My parents criticized my attitude whenever they visited. Sometimes I came home to find them sitting comfortably on my sofa without even calling first. Dad had somehow acquired a spare key. When I asked where he'd gotten it, he answered as though I were asking something ridiculous. Emma needed one. I never agreed to that. We're family. There was that word again. Family. Used like a master key. As though it unlocked every boundary, every lock, every right. One rainy Thursday evening, I stood on the apartment balcony watching water streak down the railing. Cars hissed along the street below. The maple trees bent beneath the wind. I suddenly realized I was gripping the railing so tightly my fingers hurt. Was this really my life now? Fighting for permission to exist inside the home I'd spent years earning? A terrifying thought followed. Maybe they won't stop. Maybe they'll keep pushing. Until I leave voluntarily. That possibility frightened me more than any argument ever had, because if that was the plan, it was working. I had already started browsing apartment listings online, just to see, just in case. I closed the browser almost immediately. No, this was my home. Why was I the only one expected to leave? The answer came unexpectedly. A week later, while I was carrying groceries upstairs, I overheard voices through my own front door. Dad, Mom, Emma. They hadn't realized I was home. Dad chuckled. She's almost there. Mom laughed quietly. I give it another couple of weeks. Emma asked, what if she still refuses? Dad answered with absolute confidence. Then we'll make it uncomfortable enough that she won't have a choice. I stood frozen outside my own apartment. A grocery bag slowly slipped from my fingers. An apple rolled down the hallway, bumping softly against the wall. Nobody inside heard it. I couldn't breathe. Not because I was shocked anymore, because, for the first time, I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't poor communication. It wasn't misplaced concern for Emma. It was a coordinated plan. They weren't asking me to leave. They were trying to force me out. And standing there in that silent hallway, listening to my own parents strategize how to push me from my home, I finally stopped asking myself how to save the relationship. Instead, for the very first time, I started asking a very different question. What, exactly, did they think they legally owned? The night I overheard them planning to push me out of my own home, I didn't go inside right away. I stood in the hallway, grocery bags slowly tearing under its own weight, apples rolling near my feet like they didn't belong to anyone either. My body felt detached, like I was watching someone else live my life from a few feet away. Inside the apartment, I could still hear them laughing. My mother's soft voice, my father's confident tone, Emma's careless little, ugh, finally. They weren't worried. They were comfortable. That was the part that made something in me go very still. Not panic, not anger, clarity. I quietly picked up the groceries, unlocked the door, and walked in like nothing had happened. Because if they thought I was already breaking, I wanted them to keep believing it. "Hey," I said casually, setting the bags on the counter. 3 heads turned toward me at once, too quickly, too synchronized. My mother smiled like she'd been caught doing something harmless. "Oh, Claire, we didn't hear you come in." "I can tell," I said. My father cleared his throat. Emma avoided my eyes completely. There was a half-second silence where everyone tried to decide what version of reality we were in. I chose mine first. "I'm going to my room," I said. No one stopped me. That was new. And worse. It felt intentional. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak of the apartment like it had changed ownership while I was still inside it. At 2:13 a.m., I heard footsteps. Soft, barefoot. Emma moving through the kitchen. Then a drawer opened. Closed. Then nothing. At 2:41 a.m., my father's voice. Low, controlled. "We just need the transfer to be clean." A pause. My mother. "She trusts us." A short laugh from Emma. "She always has." Something inside my chest tightened, not with sadness, but recognition. They weren't improvising. They had a structure, a plan, and I was the only variable they hadn't accounted for. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened every single document folder I owned. Mortgage files, insurance documents, tax statements, the original closing packet from when I bought the apartment. It all came out onto the kitchen table in slow, spreading layers, paper after paper, stamp after stamp, signature after signature. I read everything like I was studying for an exam that could decide whether I still had a life. At first, nothing looked unusual. Everything was standard, clean, official, boring. And that was exactly why people made mistakes. Because legal documents don't scream when something is wrong. They whisper it in margins, in clause numbers, in footnotes nobody reads twice. Hours passed. Morning became afternoon. My coffee went cold. And then, I found it. Not obvious. Not dramatic. Just a line buried under ownership structure documentation. A co-ownership clause. My name. Not as a tenant. Not as an occupant. As a primary registered owner, with full legal authority over the unit. I blinked. Read it again. Then again. My pulse slowed in a strange way. Like my body didn't know whether to panic or smile. Because here was the truth. They hadn't just been lying to me emotionally. They had been operating under a legal assumption that was completely wrong. And worse for them, they had never verified it. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about how to survive them. I was thinking about how they had survived this long without understanding what they were touching. A slow realization formed. They hadn't checked anything. Not really. They had assumed. My parents had always operated like that. Assumption-based authority. If they believed it strongly enough, it became real enough for everyone else to obey. Except this time. Reality had paperwork, and paperwork didn't care about beliefs. That afternoon, I visited the building management office. I kept my expression neutral the entire time. Polite smile, calm voice, perfectly controlled posture. Inside, I felt something sharpening, the kind of focus that removes emotion entirely. "I'd like a full copy of the ownership and occupancy records for Unit 4B, I said. The clerk nodded without question. Sure, just need ID. I handed it over. While she printed the file, I watched her keyboard clicks like they were counting down something irreversible. She stapled the documents and slid them across the counter. Here you go. I thanked her and left. Outside, I didn't open it immediately. I waited until I was halfway down the street. Then I stopped walking and looked. There it was. My name. Not hidden, not ambiguous. Registered. Confirmed. Legally binding. And something else. No transfer of ownership had ever been filed. No legal reassignment. No valid signature authorizing change of control. Which meant the entire plan my parents had been building wasn't just unethical. It was structurally impossible. They hadn't taken my home. They had only been acting like they had. A slow exhale left my lungs. I didn't feel relief yet. That came later. What I felt first was something colder. Because now I understood the truth completely. They weren't trying to steal my apartment. They were trying to convince me I had already lost it. When I got home, the apartment was empty. Too empty. No TV noise. No voices. No footsteps. Just silence. And a single note on the kitchen counter. My father's handwriting. We need to discuss your attitude, dinner at ours. Don't be difficult. I folded the note once, then again, then placed it exactly where I found it. But I didn't move, because something about the timing wasn't accidental. They didn't know what I had just found. They were still operating under their version of reality, which meant they were about to escalate. And people who escalate while wrong usually do something they can't undo. I looked toward the hallway, toward the door, toward the life I had built that they were now actively trying to overwrite. And for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't thinking about stopping them. I was thinking about letting them continue. Just a little longer, until every assumption they had made collapsed at once. And when it did, I would be standing exactly where the law said I belonged, inside my own home, waiting. The dinner invitation wasn't a request. It never had been. It was a summons dressed up as family tradition. I stood in my apartment that evening longer than I needed to, not because I was unsure, because I was listening. The silence felt different now, not empty, waiting, like the apartment itself had finally stopped being something they could redefine with enough confidence. I checked the time, 6:42 p.m. Then I picked up my keys and left. Their house still looked the same, too polished, too controlled. Like nothing messy had ever been allowed to stay long enough to become memory. I knocked once. My mother opened the door immediately, too quickly, as if she had been standing right behind it. "Claire," she said, smiling too wide. "Come in." Inside, everything was already set. 3 plates on the table. My father sitting at the head like a judge who had already read the verdict. Emma scrolling on her phone like this was background noise in her life, not a war she had helped start. I sat down. No one spoke for a moment. Then my father cleared his throat. "We're glad you came." "I didn't have much of a choice," I said calmly, a flicker in his expression. Gone, almost instantly. My mother placed her hands together. "We want this resolved." I looked at her. "So do I." That caught them slightly off guard. "Good." My father leaned forward. "You've been difficult about the apartment situation." I tilted my head. "Difficult?" "Yes," he said firmly, "refusing to cooperate with something that benefits your sister." Emma sighed loudly. "Claire, you're making this way bigger than it needs to be." I almost smiled. Almost. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a thin folder on the table. Not dramatic, not rushed, just deliberate. My father glanced at it. "What's this?" "Information," I said. My mother frowned. "Claire." "I'd open it," I interrupted gently. Something in my tone made her stop. Not authority, not anger, certainty. That was new for them. My father opened the folder. He read the first page, then the second, then stopped. Just stopped. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. Then he flipped back to the first page again like it might have changed. It hadn't. My mother leaned in. "What is it?" she asked. His voice came out lower than before. "That's not possible." I nodded slightly. "But it is." Emma finally looked up. "What is it?" My father didn't answer her. He kept reading. My mother grabbed the document from his hands. Her eyes scanned quickly. At first confusion, then irritation, then something sharper. "No," she said immediately. "This must be outdated." "It isn't," I replied. Emma reached for it now, but my father pulled it back. His expression had changed. Not angry yet. Not fully. But the first crack had formed. "You said you were the owner," he said slowly. "I am." My mother shook her head. "That's not what you told us." "I didn't tell you anything," I said. Silence. A deeper silence this time, the kind that doesn't wait to be filled. My father stood up. Slowly. Too controlled. "This doesn't change anything." I looked at him. "It changes everything." "No," he said firmly. "We've already made arrangements." I felt it then. The shift. The moment where people realize the story they built doesn't match the documents in front of them, and choose denial anyway. Emma frowned. "What arrangements?" My mother answered too quickly. "Never mind that." My father pointed at the folder. "This can be challenged." I nodded once. "You can try." That stopped him. Not the words. The confidence behind them. Because confidence like that doesn't come from bluffing. It comes from knowing exactly what is and isn't contestable. I leaned forward slightly. "I want to make something very clear," I said. No one spoke. This apartment was never transferred. No deed was signed. No ownership change exists. You didn't take anything from me. I paused. You just acted like you did. My mother's face tightened. That's not how we understood it. I know. Emma finally looked uncomfortable. This is ridiculous, she muttered. But her voice lacked conviction now. My father stared at me. So what do you want? There it was. The first real question in the entire conversation. I didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't about wanting. It never had been. It was about correction. About restoring boundaries that had been ignored long before the apartment was ever involved. I want you to stop entering my home without permission, I said. My mother opened her mouth, closed it. My father didn't react. I continued. I want you to stop speaking as if my life is negotiable. Silence again. And I want you to understand something very important. I looked directly at each of them, one by one. You were never in control of this situation. That sentence landed differently. I could see it. The mental recalculation, the scrambling for alternative interpretations. My father's voice dropped. You're exaggerating the legal side of this. No, I said quietly. You are. Something shifted in him then. A subtle loss of composure. He stood fully now. This is still family property in practice. That word again. Practice. As if repetition creates ownership. I stood as well. Not aggressively, just evenly. No, I said. It isn't. My mother stepped forward. Claire, don't do this. Do what? Destroy your relationship with your family over pride. I looked at her for a long moment, then spoke softly. You destroyed it when you decided my consent didn't matter. That made her stop. Emma stood up abruptly. This is insane, she snapped. I've been living there for months. You've been staying there, I corrected. Her face flushed. That's the same thing. No, I said. It isn't. A beat. Then my father exhaled sharply. You're going to regret pushing this. I nodded slightly. No, I said. You are. That was the moment everything changed, because for the first time, they understood I wasn't bluffing. Not emotionally, not legally, not anymore. I placed the folder back into my bag, then added something else on the table, a copy of the formal notice I had already submitted earlier that day. My mother stared at it. What is this? Notice of sole occupancy enforcement, I said calmly. My father's eyes narrowed. You filed something? Yes. When? This morning. Emma looked between us. What does that mean? My father answered quietly. It means she has formally asserted exclusive rights to the property. A pause. Then his voice hardened again. But that doesn't mean we can't. It means, I interrupted, that any further unauthorized entry is now documented. Silence again. Different this time. He understood. Finally. Not emotionally. Practically. My mother's voice softened. Claire, we're still your parents. I looked at her. I know. That was the truth. And the problem. Because they believed that role granted them authority over things it never had. My father spoke one last time. This isn't over. I nodded once. You're right. I turned toward the door, then stopped, and looked back. Not angrily, not dramatically, just calmly. It ends when you stop trying to rewrite my life. Then I left. The walk home was quiet. The air felt colder than it had an hour earlier. Not because anything outside had changed, but because I had. When I unlocked my apartment door, I paused for a second, then stepped inside. And for the first time in months, it felt like mine again. Not because it had ever stopped being mine, but because I finally understood something simple. Ownership doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg to be believed. It just exists, and everything else eventually has to adjust around it. Behind me, the door clicked shut. And this time, I didn't wonder what they would do next, because whatever they tried now was happening outside the only place that actually mattered. The days after that dinner didn't explode. They unraveled. Quietly. My parents didn't show up unannounced again. The spare key mysteriously stopped being useful. Emma stopped posting photos that looked like she owned my space. And for the first time in months, my apartment became silent in a way that felt safe again. Not watched, not occupied. Mine. There were no dramatic apologies, no emotional breakdowns. Just distance. And that distance said more than any argument ever could. Because people who are certain they are right don't retreat unless something forces them to understand they were never as powerful as they believed. A week later, I received a short message from my father. We should talk when things calm down. I didn't reply, not out of anger, out of clarity. Because calm down was just another way of saying, we hope you forget what we tried to do. But I didn't need to forget. I just needed to stop participating. Sitting alone in my apartment one evening, I looked around differently than I had before. The scratches on the floor, the faint hum of the fridge, the soft glow of the streetlights through the window. Everything felt unchanged, but my perception of it had shifted completely. I had spent so long believing home was something people could vote on, something that could be reassigned if enough people agreed. But that wasn't how it worked. Home wasn't a consensus. It was a fact. And facts don't bend for family expectations. For the first time in a long time, I slept deeply. No footsteps, no voices behind walls, no mental rehearsal of arguments I would never be allowed to finish. Just rest. Real rest. If there's one thing this taught me, it's this. People will often assume your silence means permission. They will assume your kindness means weakness. And they will assume your stability means they can rearrange your life without consequence. but assumptions only last until someone finally reads what was actually written down. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more revenge narratives where the quiet ones turn out to have the strongest position all along. And tell me in the comments, would you have confronted them earlier or waited until the paperwork spoke for you? Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't what you take back. It's what was never theirs to begin with.